Is this thing still on?
Sounds like they heard us. We are seeing some change.
We need to continue to disrupt the status quo.
And now the work begins.
You are now about to witness the strength of nursing knowledge.
Welcome to the Gritty Nurse Podcast, an unfiltered discussion on health and healthcare. My name is Sarah Fung.
My name is Amie Archibald-Varley, and we are your hosts. Our Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail national best-selling book is available now. Get your copy of The Wisdom of Nurses today. You can get a book for purchase at any of your local retailers like Indigo or Chapters, or pick up your book online through Amazon or other types of retailers. It's also available in various different formats like audiobook and on Kindle. If you read it and you loved it, please leave us a review.
Please make sure you subscribe on our YouTube channel where you can watch our podcast in video format. Like, share, and leave a review. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or any other podcast platform, leave us a rating and review. Thank you to all our listeners and sponsors who continue to support us.
Your support makes our podcast possible, and we're grateful for the partnership and for you believing in our work here at the Gritty Nurse Podcast. Stay gritty. Hi, and welcome to the Gritty Nurse Podcast, an unfiltered podcast related to health and healthcare. My name is Amie.
And my name is Sarah.
And we are your hosts. So today we have a great episode again. We're looking at talking about like patient-focused, family-focused forms of healthcare and intersecting politics and policy and all of these various different aspects. And we need to talk about leadership because I think this is one of the conversations that we've been having for a long time. And I think leadership is actually one of the most emerging conversations within healthcare. Yes, we have all of a variety of challenges, but we've seen the challenges of seeing what true leadership looks like amongst healthcare walls, particularly also accountability. We've seen the issues within the states. Again, there's no new surprises here. But the thing is, those same effects trickle down to Canadian healthcare as well. So again, we're really looking to speak to. We actually have a guest who is a healthcare leadership expert, and we're going to dive into some of the topics with our guest. So, without further ado, Sarah, can you please introduce our guest?
Yeah, so I think today the theme really is about exploring different perspectives, right? Because we've talked a lot about our experience as nurses providing the care,
right.
But who's receiving the care? And as nurses, we also are patients at some point. And I think a lot of times there's this us versus them mentality when it comes to leadership. But the truth is we are all leaders in some way. So I think everything we're going to be discussing in this episode really applies to most everyone listening. And so without further ado, I'd love to introduce Dr. Laura Desveaux. She's a scientist, health system leader, and the founder and executive director of Women Who Lead, a not-for-profit dedicated to supporting the career advancement and leadership development of women in the health sector. In each of these roles, Laura focuses on closing the gap between current performance and what science and experience tell us is possible. Dr. Desveaux's work in behavioral science tackles healthcare's most persistent problems by examining the future of health leadership, team performance, and identifying how culture and context influence success and failure. This approach provides insights into how affect change at both individual and system levels. So welcome, Laura. Thanks for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on the lung capacity to get through that intro.
I know that was just the short version because I found a longer one on your website, but we went with the short version, and I'm sure you've done so much more than that too. So don't be shy at telling us about all the great things you've done. I was thinking if you could just start by telling us a little bit more about yourself and your background outside of what I just shared on your little bio.
Yeah, let me see if I can do a bit of a hop, skip, and jump. I started my career in healthcare as a physical therapist. Absolutely loved it. I think like a lot of people in healthcare, I'm intrinsically motivated by making a difference, improving things for people, communities, populations. So it started early. I was also the child, if we go way back, who was always asking, why? How does this work? Help me understand. And so as fate would have it, I went on to do a PhD so that I could stop annoying everybody else with those questions and equip myself with the skill set to answer them myself. And then honestly, it was just following that curiosity over time. I started out my career as a scientist answering questions that the health system cared about. How well does this work? How many emergency department visits are we diverting with this great new program? And what I learned pretty quickly was it's rare that we have a catastrophically bad idea in healthcare, although it does happen. What happens much more often, and sort of pan-Canadian and across the world, is that we don't implement things well. So I got really curious about, well, what's in our control, and how do we iterate, calibrate so that we can deliver better value for what it is we're already doing. Or if we are on the complete wrong path, let's get off that and go on a different one. So at that point is when I really started to realize that closing the gap between where we are now and what we're capable of would drive everything I did. And it won't surprise either of you that in a healthcare context, where that's sort of taken me is at the level of leadership, because it's where, aside from policy, it's the most malleable influence on culture and performance. And so currently spending my efforts understanding and supporting that endeavor.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of funny that you mentioned that you used to ask why. That was kind of like my little mantra too. I think I kind of mentioned in our book, where like I just was a bucket full of questions. So I completely understand. I mean, I'm not going to get my PhD. Kudos to you. But I mean, I think it's actually important. I think we actually need to be asking why more often. And like you said, particularly in healthcare, for whatever reason, we have the evidence. We do a really good job of investigating, finding out. And then when it comes to that implementation stage, we'll wait about 8 to 15 years before we implement it. And then there's new science and new information. And we're always, it seems like we're always kind of light years behind.
Yeah. And I think also when you ask the question why and the other person gets defensive, you also need to ask, why is that person behaving that way?
Why all the whys?
all of the whys. And I think in leadership or in life, honestly, I think about my kids even, we haven't been taught to ask the questions that get us the answers that we need.
Right.
And why is an obvious place to start. We start there when we're, as soon as we can speak. But to your point, Sarah, you get into situations where why triggers a defensive reaction in people. And so what we need to develop is, okay, if that's not the entry point to getting curious together, then what is? And I think that's part of how we unlock capability from, the boardroom, the C-suite, all the way down to the front line.
All right, I want to hold on to this why. I'm gonna come back to it with another question, because I think this is actually like what you mentioned in terms of people are really struggling with the questions that need to be asked. And again, I don't want to put words in your mouth. And I know the question is going to come later, so I'm going to hold that thought, put it back into my head. But one of the things I want to talk to you about, particularly in relation to healthcare leadership, is this whole aspect of, we talk about healthcare being in crisis. And I do believe that healthcare leadership is in crisis. I believe that there is an imagery, like we need to change the image of healthcare leadership. And again, looking at the borders, Canada and US, we've got our different problems, but fundamentally, I think there is an issue. And I think that there are some angry people, Laura, and I think you probably understand that as well. What are your thoughts and perspectives on this? What is it that you would like to say as a healthcare leader to people who might be feeling angry with healthcare leadership right now?
What a great question. Again, I have two parts to my response to that. The first is, anytime someone is angry about something, the first thing I get curious about is, are we defining this thing or understanding it in the same way? So before we think about the leaders themselves, the people in the positions, do we have the same understanding of what it means to lead? And the sort of simple definition I would give is that leadership is, or I guess not a definition, more of an explanation. I think when there's anger, leadership is often mistaken as the act of choosing this versus that,
right?
One versus the other. And most certainly, if the last few years have taught us anything, and all the challenges we have, it's that leadership is the act of balancing and integrating things that seem to be at odds. So, often I hear often, given the challenges that are facing the system, is, well, are we standardizing care or personalizing it to the patient? Am I treating the person in front of me, or are we and sort of optimizing their outcome, or am I prioritizing care for a population? Is it about individualized attention or efficiency? If we stop thinking about things in terms of either or, and instead agree that it has to be a both.
Yeah.
You have to pursue efficiency and individualized attention. Then the real estate we're standing on changes. You can have empathy for why that's challenging and why it can't be done quickly. And the two of you have, years of experience and who knows how many conversations with staff at the front line. That when you think about it that way, no one person can answer that question. If you were to say to me, what's the solution? I'd say, well, I need to, I can give you my thoughts, but I can't make that decision in and of itself. I think when it comes to people being angry, you then need to look at the behaviors and values and integrity of the people that they are angry with. If they understand the role to be the same, then it's, well, how transparent is that individual? What do they look like when they're accountable? Because we don't get angry with people when things are going well and we're seeing the outcomes we want. And then often when I'm chatting with other leaders or coaching other leaders about how to deal with that, I sort of say to them, we need to get really curious about what Amie's experience was. Or is, and what it is that's a conflict so that we can close that gap. And all of that is data. It's all insights on how we make the system better. Fully recognizing that no matter what industry or setting we're in, there will always be bad apples that abuse their power or aren't acting in a values-based way. But one of the things that keeps me doing what we're doing, because if I'm honest, there have been days where I'm like, why don't I quit? Is that there are so many remarkable humans who get just as frustrated with the system as who are experiencing that. And if we can just harness that motivation to be better together, then I think a whole lot is possible.
Yeah, I think I want to almost build on that because I feel like when you mentioned the values that we have and what we place emphasis on as value, of course, here comes my lean brain. But I think to myself, particularly about like the CAN and U system, we in terms of our healthcare leaders and the challenges that we have, I think maybe it may, and you can disagree with me. Like I think Canada, the issue or the issue right now is the value of time spent in an ED or whatever the case may be, that time of waiting. So people don't see the value or the value stream or whatever in terms of waiting. They feel like the care is inefficient, and there are inefficiencies within our healthcare system. And I feel like the other part of the accountability from a Canadian perspective is the fact that we're pressing our leaders. We don't actually have like an accountability officer for healthcare. We have Dr. Kieran Moore, and I don't know where he is, particularly in Ontario. We just don't have that accountability. So, health crises come. We're talking about, seeing more rises in flu cases and this resurgence of fearful of having another pandemic, but we don't hear any health leaders talking about it. And again, I mean, this will speak to probably another question that'll come up, that whole like finding the truth about information, particularly health information, where a lot of people are very frustrated. And then I think juxtaposing that to the American system, where people are just fundamentally mad at the system, like the system of healthcare in the United States, because they have a for-profit model. So at least in Canada, where I feel like the incentives to try to do the right thing are there because there isn't that money that someone can put in their pocket behind it. So I still feel like we're still forced to try to make sure that the right things are being done. But like in the system or an economy in the States where, healthcare is for profit, or depending on, the company that you work for, you might fall under Medicaid or Medicare or various different derivations, and you might not be able to get the outcome that we're seeing. The response to healthcare leadership is a little bit different. And again, we don't want that response here either. But again, I think these are important aspects like you talked about, the value. We need to find out what is it the value for Canadians are, and what is it that we want to see. And those are the conversations that need to be had. Again, as well as with our US partners, I think it's going to be a much more of a challenging conversation again, in terms of the value stream out there, because they are putting people in that don't have healthcare backgrounds, that are spreading misinformation about whether it's vaccines, autism, and different things. So again, different challenges, and I'm thankful to be here. But again, just that we need to see that value and that conversation had between healthcare providers, patients, and families in the community.
Yeah, and I think that just speaking to what you said about the, is it efficiency or is it patient experience? And in my head, I was already thinking, well, why couldn't it be both? Like, why does it have to be an either or a black and white answer? We can have both things, and it doesn't have to be an us versus them mentality. And I think in healthcare, Amie and I have seen a lot of siloing, right? There's, we say we want to work together, but the truth is sometimes we don't know how, or maybe we've never seen it work effectively. And I think that's a big issue, which kind of segues into the next question I wanted to ask you, which is, what do you think is the biggest challenge right now in terms of being in healthcare leadership? Like, what are they facing that is a big struggle, in your opinion?
Such a great question. Let's see how long we have. I'm going to pick up on a comment you just made, Sarah, because honestly, if you said pick one thing, like what's the biggest thing we need to pay attention to in health leadership? I actually think it's less about building up people's knowledge and more about building their capability or their skill and applying that knowledge in practice. I think that, again, I'm so heartened by the number of leaders I meet at different stages, manager, director, executive, whatever their title is, who aren't happy with the way things are, but recognize that you don't get to abandon that and sort of rebuild from scratch. Healthcare can't take a sabbatical or a hiatus. So I think the most important thing is recognizing that healthcare isn't immune to the reality that the half-life for professional skills now is 5 years.
Wow.
There will be clinical skills and clinical knowledge and emotional intelligence capabilities that endure over time. But currently, you need to be technologically proficient. You need to understand AI and what its potential is and how to govern it appropriately. You need to be able to understand population level data so that you can care for everyone you serve, but also personalize care to the circumstances of the patients that are coming through your door. I do think that we need to take a moment and think about, in 2025, really glad I got the year right on that one. We need to think about what are the capabilities we need right now and develop the ambidexterity to apply them in the moments that they're needed. Because I think the shared experience that many people have in healthcare, irrespective of their role, is that they've just been thrown into the arena to fight and that they don't have the tools that they need. They didn't even know they were going to be, in the middle of an arena having a fight. And so there's all these people that have an opinion, rightfully so sometimes, but they're missing the context. We're all missing context from each other. So I think that's the biggest thing that I see. The other point that I would be remiss not to mention is we get this, like the system is getting the outcomes it's designed for. And so I think it is important to acknowledge that that like we've created the silos that we have, like the way that the system is funded, the way that we've set up different structures, sort of directly incentivize and dictate the way that things happen right now. But yes, that can be true. And as leaders, we can still find the locus of control we have within our budgets, within our departments to do things a little bit differently. And I have a question that I want to toss back at the two of you, because every time someone will give me a mic in a room full of leaders in healthcare, and I mean that both formally and informally, I ask the question, what should we stop doing?
It's so funny that you said that, because I was going to say to you, okay, Fine. We'll answer your question. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll happily answer it too, but like everybody's in survival mode.
Mhm.
Frontline is in survival mode. Leaders are in survival mode. If you could, like, if anyone can orchestrate a crash in Outlook so that all the meetings in my calendar are gone, I would pay a pretty handsome sum for that. But
Right.
like, again, that's an element of shared experience. And if we don't get honest with ourselves about how we can help to create the space for us to think about things differently, then the three of us are going to be sitting back here in 3 years having the same flavor of a conversation and wondering what the point is. And so the best time to do something different was yesterday, and the second best time is now.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of things I could say, but just very topically in my mind is right now we need to stop blaming each other. So the truth is we're in a tough place right now with healthcare, with a lot of different things, with the government, the political climate. I think the first thing to do is stop blaming each other and try to work together and find a solution and be productive. There's a lot of finger pointing, and I think it raises a lot of people's defenses. And I don't feel like it moves anything forward other than pushing us further apart. So that be top of mind right now. I'm sure there are other things I could think of if we had more time.
Yeah, I would say just fundamentally change is hard, like you mentioned, right off the top. Like I probably could ask you, how did your integration of Epic go, or whatever it was that you were updating, and even just talking, like you were mentioning that we're going to be looking at healthcare integration with AI. Change is hard. Getting people to do something that they're not used to doing, or not used to having a particular conversation is difficult, but it's also trying to figure out how do we facilitate those types of conversations? How do we make something that we consider to be very difficult tangible? And I am one of those people about the whole idea behind the power of small. So whether that's smaller conversations, making things bite-sized, making things more tangible, making those goals. It's like you might have this large goal to say, okay, at the end of the year, we're going to integrate this new type of technology, but here are the small bite-sized pieces that we're going to do to get there. I think all of those things are part of it, like how to have sustainable and meaningful change, and also making sure that people are part of the journey. I think that where we see a lot of the frustration or anger is because people don't feel that they're engaged. Again, if you don't have engagement at work, you don't have engagement in healthcare, people feel dejected. And when people feel dejected, they act out in a variety of different ways. I'm probably speaking to something that you quite already understand. And we've seen that. We've seen how people play out those frustration, whether it's an FU Trudeau flag, or whether it's like, standing up in protest at Queen's Park against healthcare or privatization of healthcare. We're seeing it manifest in healthy and non-healthy and unproductive ways, productive ways. But again, it's once, like Sarah said, starting the conversation, no naming and blaming, and two, breaking things down and making change more palpable and easier for people. And again, I know that's easier said than done, but there's a science to it. There's a way to make it happen. And I think that above all of this healthcare stuff, I mean, we're having that conversation right now, but I feel that there's a lot of other underlying tensions way outside of healthcare that we need to talk about as a society before we can even really start to lose some other issues. But that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, I love the stop blaming. I also, was grinning ear to ear because one of my favorite things is when I am in a conversation with, you said, I'm never going to get a PhD. Well, that's fine, but you're already evidence-based in the things that you're pointing to. And if we stop blaming, one of the things, Amie, that I want to make explicit that you said is we need a shared goal. And it's okay for, like, we can acknowledge that there's all these other things, political leadership, funding. It's a very long list if we want to go through it all, that is creating challenges. Let's park that and say, okay, that's the big thing we can get to, but what's the small thing we can do now? And so if we have a shared goal and then we break that into bite-sized pieces, we're 4 times more likely to achieve it.
Yep.
And, none of us, not a single person, has the intelligence or experience needed to identify the solution. We have to come together. And it's just so interesting to human nature, by the way, for anyone that's like, oh my gosh, it's so simple, but so hard. Human nature is that we have subtraction neglect. You give us something that isn't balanced and we'll add something to it to level it. That's what we do. So it takes intentionality to say, okay, if this is so important, which I believe, like I've never heard anyone say it's not, then what is it that we need to remove? And for all of the leaders, and honestly, anyone in healthcare who's listening right now, I challenge you to go back to work tomorrow and identify what's the one thing that I need to take out of my day-to-day that'll create the space to build the connections that are needed, break down the silos, think about things differently. And then for those that are in a position, ask your colleagues or your team, what do I need to get out of your way? Because often we've just made an incorrect assumption that it's creating value when it's not.
Right.
And it's amazing how easy it becomes in those micro moments to just be like, okay, well, then we'll stop meeting as a team, every week and move it to monthly if that frees up time. So we make a lot of assumptions, I think, as well. And the more we can do something as simple as, okay, so the purpose of this is X. If it's no longer delivering on that, we're accountable to each other to say that so that we can do something different. And it's about, I always use the analogy of sitting on the same side of the picnic table, but too often we're sitting across from each other, and that position in and of itself leads to blaming and creating that either or instead of working together to solve the problem.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I think that, we've talked about all the different challenges because I was going to actually say to you while you were giving your answer before you caught us off guard. No, but before you asked us, I was going to say, in terms of all the work that you're doing, what do you feel is stopping you? Because that's a whole other, another part of that solution focused thinking about saying, okay, you have all the tools, or maybe you don't, but what might be stopping you? But don't worry about answering that, because I think we kind of touched on it. So but let's maybe look at it from a different lens. Are there any wins? Are there anything that we can celebrate right now in terms of healthcare leadership?
Yes, I think the hard thing about that, I just had to remind myself, you thought that in your head, Laura, you didn't say it out loud. What I'll say out loud is, we've talked about no blaming. We've talked about the need for accountability. So if we shift away from blaming, I think we need to shift towards accountability and patience. And part of how we operationalize accountability is by being clear on what the goal is and then communicating sort of progress against that. Because I promise you, I won't dive into the science, but the concept is called operational transparency. So let's say you online shop or order a pizza from Domino's. You're going to get an email saying order was received, or Domino's has this little pizza tracker and it tells you when. It's going to tell you a lot about how I spend my time. Your order's received.
I know the pizza tracker. I know what you're talking about.
Your pizza's being made. Yeah, it brings a lot of joy. If someone closes that browser in my house, they're in trouble. But you know that something's happening. Sometimes it happens really fast, but even if it doesn't, you see the progress.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And same thing when you order something online. We've received your order. We'll let you know when it's packaged and ready to go. Then we'll email you when it's shipped. And some people hate that, but that's the concept of operational transparency. I think what I would celebrate is two things. One, it takes a while in a large healthcare organization to get everybody understanding something in the same way. And what I would celebrate is that we've taken the time in certain places and spaces to use the same words are we using this term the same way? What does it mean when we say we're going to center patient experience? What does it mean when we say we're going to co-design? What does that actually look like? How do we know we've done it well? And what I would celebrate is I've seen so many partnerships across organizational boundaries. I see so many more, not just patients at the table, but community organizations who are connected to communities by definition, different populations of people with different identities. And I don't just mean community organizations that deliver healthcare services, school systems, religious organizations, like the types of organizations where people really feel like there's a sense of community. And this brings me back to, I'm literally just trying to, I don't even knit, but if I was, this is going to be a gorgeous sweater. Amie, you touched on this without calling it out explicitly earlier. It's so important as a leader to connect the dots. And so in addition to having accountability and that transparency, so people see the progress as it goes along or see when you've hit a roadblock, it's important to connect the dots, but also not feel like it's primarily your responsibility. It's so funny that that was the example, because what I was trying to do was connect the dots between different points of our conversation, but we're all going to stumble. And so it's your job to see the connections, but to work collectively to bring them together, because my lived experience, my perspective, the training that I have only allows me to see one angle. And while I might connect the dots in one way, either one of you are part of the same conversation and may say, yes, and here's a part of accountability that we were missing, or here's a part of operational transparency that really matters to Canadians. So I think those are the elements we need to see, and to anchor it back to health leadership, it's a choice to be in that position. And so when we choose to be in that position, those are the things we need to take accountability for operationalizing, but not by ourselves, with others.
Yeah. And I think it's okay to stumble. Like, I think maybe that's the part in leadership in a variety of different ways that we don't see. We don't see that vulnerability, that the fact that maybe a leader can be like make a mistake or stumble and say, hey, I messed up and I need support in this way, or I need to look at this in a different manner. I think that vulnerability in leadership is something that's actually probably really important that we don't see nearly enough within healthcare leadership. So I think that even though we may stumble, recognizing and acknowledging that has happened, and then getting back up and saying, hey, how can we do this better together? So I love that example that you just gave. I don't even think you realized that that was the example that you kind of laid
intention.
But it was a good one, right?
But
I'm so glad that you brought some positivity to this conversation, because I think a lot of the conversation about leadership is very negative, right? So to highlight the fact that we are doing all these things, that we're looking for each other's blind spots. I think that's a really important thing, is that leaders don't have to be everything, right? We're all people too, and people need to understand when they have missed something, or if they could see things in a different way, and only someone else can bring that to the table. It can't just be all in one person. So I know in other industries outside of healthcare, there are different types of leadership models that have worked. Do you have any thoughts on a leadership model that we should be striving towards in healthcare? And will that serve patients and families in a different way?
Sort of. I actually think I want to change the question, or reframe it. It's not that there's one leadership model, because we could sit here and define servant leadership and say, of course, that's the right model because we're here to serve staff and patients.
Right.
We could talk about adaptive leadership and say, of course, that's the right model because things are constantly changing. So I don't think it's about which model. I think it's about integrating and identifying in which context do I need to call most on servant leadership? In which context do I need to be adaptable? I think, and again, there's sort of, it's emerging in the leadership literature as well. There will always be people that publish models. And really, I think, every model stands on the one before it, but it's about aligning on the goal that, why we do what we do is to make things better for patients and populations. And so if we can now put that in permanent marker, then in any given situation, we can say, okay, what's going on here? What does this situation require from me as a leader? And then how do I, sort of flex into that? Do I need to build capabilities to better deal with this? Or do I already have the skills that are needed? Now, you don't get to opt out of a situation because you don't have the skills you need, but you can simultaneously say, this is going to happen again. I need to develop them. And I think that one of the things that I often, it's going to happen so many more times in my career, but it shocks me every time. I'll be in a conversation where Amie, you'll say, we really need to there's a problem in the ED, like this capacity is crazy. You need to do something about these wait times right now. And then Sarah says, we have a massive backlog in surgery. We need to address that so that, because these people that are waiting for surgery are ending up in the ED. Except that connection's never made. I just betrayed the way that I think about these problems and describing it. And what you need to do is sit back and say, okay, there is a bigger problem here that is connecting both these surgical backlogs and ED capacity. Understanding that connection is the first thing. What pandemic aside for a moment, because there's a lot of challenges that have resulted from a backlog of care. But how do we simultaneously alleviate some of the pressure each of you are experiencing so that we can care for more patients that need it, while also realizing that Band-Aid just-in-time solutions aren't going to help and isn't going to help anyone ultimately get the right care they need when they need it. And we all know that if we don't think about the bigger picture, the people who aren't going to get the care when they need it most are the people who are structurally marginalized from equity deserving groups. Like, it's just going to get worse.
Right.
And so we have to decide that we care enough to do the hard work of both. Like, let's figure out what we can alleviate now. And if we can't, let's decide on that together and be clear about the time horizon. Like, your pizza's going to take 50 minutes instead of the 15 you want it to be, but it'll be delicious. You'll get your pizza, and so will everybody else, or whatnot. I use food analogies a lot. They're very effective.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly how we should be looking at it. Again, if we're looking at models, we can't look to one. We have to look at a variety, integrate them all if necessary. And also, I like that last piece that you mentioned in terms of, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be either or. How do we make it both? How do we make, maybe, like you said, maybe the pizza can take 50 minutes. You'll see it on that accountability timer, but at the end of the day, you'll get it. And it, like you said, it'll be delicious. And I think that's how healthcare should be. Mm-hmm. Not delicious, but just, efficient. And it works for all patients, not just for some. One of the things that I kind of to round out this conversation is talking about a little bit of an experience I had. And again, just across the globe, conversations are being had about having more people being at the driver's seat of their healthcare experience. Particularly, I had a not so great healthcare experience at a particular organization that I will not mention. But one of the things is, when I went to go look at their leadership board so I can, do my due diligence as a citizen and email the leadership team was unavailable, like literally unavailable. Their names were listed, emails were removed. And I think this speaks to the whole aspect of accountability. And, if folks want to be a part of their healthcare journey, how can we make it if, leaders aren't actually available? So how do we make leaders available? Because sometimes we feel like they're far away. We feel that there might be a hierarchy between the way that we might communicate with a healthcare leader. If I'm just a patient, because I would hate hearing anyone say that. But how do we see that availability within our health leaders and feel like they're not, a whole world away?
A couple of thoughts on that. I'm going to kind of go far and then come back. The going far is that, I envision a future where there's different mechanisms of providing feedback. Like, how when you go into the washroom at the airport, there's the little smiley thing. It's like, today. So there's things like that. There's now in many places, there's scan the QR code and submit your feedback. So there's different mechanisms such that it's like real time. We're able to get, I think part of effectively addressing feedback is not having it, go through all of these loops and turns before it gets to where it needs to go. And then simultaneously, once you have that system, equipping people on the other end with, like, here's the ways in which we can respond to this. When it's positive, let's feed that back to the front, like feed it back to the team, the department, the person that created that positive experience. So that's that sort of pathway. It reminds me of like the old school mail system in an organization where it would just follow the tubes would follow.
Mhm.
But so you need to identify, like, as we triage that, what happens? Where do we want those things to go? Because some of the reticence to make leadership accessible is because there's no process or shared understanding of how are we going to deal with this? And do we have the confidence and trust in one another to deal with it? What I loved about this conversation earlier is when I was like, oh God, you're going to have to say in the middle of this podcast that you just lost your train of thought, that you two were like, no problem, we'll give you a second. And then I was like, what was I talking about? So there's giving each other a grace. So I think there's no trust in leadership, but honestly, there's a lot of fear as health leaders that you're going to be judged, that you're going to be discredited, like you're doing what you're doing to make a difference, and to lose the ability to do that would be heartbreaking. It's shocking to me that you had that experience. I was trying to go through my head. I was like, I don't know if I've ever seen an organization that doesn't have contact information or an easy mechanism to reach someone. I do think multiple easy touch points. Here's the, patient feedback line. Here's the emails of the people. Again, it's not just we have the patient feedback email on our website, but if it means the most to someone to direct that to someone, then that's what should be available. I also think healthcare is very hierarchical. And when we talk about performance, and the North Star of performance is better patient outcomes and patient experience equitably, it actually was a surprising finding in the literature that when you have organizations with more hierarchy, you actually need even more empathy to reach better performance. And so I think the question is not just connectivity to leaders or visibility to, but how do we create the conditions where leaders can empathize with patients, community, staff, and like it's bi-directional is what I'm trying to say. So
I feel like, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to, the more human we can allow each other to be while still holding each other accountable goes a long way to that connectivity and visibility, because it's a lot easier to be angry at a title or a name with no face. And it's okay to be angry in circumstances, when care isn't what it should be. But oftentimes people are, more often than not, they're sharing their experience because they know it can be better. Mm-hmm. They're not doing it to condemn or to criticize, but if that insight doesn't filter up, we can't make it better for you the next time or the next person like you. And again, it's sort of sitting on the same side of the picnic table. But to your initial point, Amie, there has to be an easy way to get in touch with those people. And then the loop has to be closed. It can't just be, yep, we've received your feedback, thanks.
Yeah, I think the scariest part for me was, again, having the background as a nurse, as a health equity advocate, understanding how, like the system should work, and knowing that if it's inefficient for me, imagine someone who doesn't have health literacy, that doesn't have that knowledge behind it, doesn't have the understanding of the system walking into those doors. It's heartbreaking. It's terrifying, because I know that people are coming in and these things are happening. So again, for me, it wasn't even just about me. It was more to say, like, hey, here's a real opportunity to try to do something different and to try to make it better, because I know that this doesn't meet the standard of care, but I know that there's many other people out there that would have no idea that this doesn't meet the standard of care, whether it's an interaction I had with the clerk or whatever the case may be. I think that feedback should be validated, not just with the response, but by doing something too. And I think one of the things that I see, like you mentioned, there's that hierarchy where I think that a lot of people see that disconnect because some of the leaders don't come out. They don't meet with the communities. They're kind of stuck in their ivory towers and feel unreachable. And I think this is, I think we're particularly here in Canada, we have a unique opportunity where, CEOs should meet people where they are, particularly in healthcare. Go out and hear the concerns. They don't have to read about them in a report. Go down the street, down Niagara Falls, and see, or downtown Hamilton, and see the homelessness crisis. I think this is where that empathy really can come come to power, where you can see, if you're seeing what's going on, you're going to be compelled to act and do things differently. So that's maybe my ask for CEOs and health leaders. The reports are always going to be there. Someone's going to generate that report. But what's more powerful than a report than actually talking to people and seeing what's actually happening on the ground, getting out to meet people? I think we need to see more healthcare leadership like that.
Yeah. And I think I think the impetus behind it, and maybe what you were thinking, Amie, is that you don't want the same thing to happen to someone else, right? Yeah. So you had this negative experience, but hopefully there's meaning that can come out of it. And the friction to you being able to reach senior leadership. I mean, I think we're all going to be going and Googling now our local hospitals to see how accessible
after the episode.
Okay, to see how accessible they are. But that actually got me thinking, maybe we need to modernize the way that leaders interact with the public. And in person is great, but maybe it needs to be a bit more social media. Maybe we need to be making more videos and sharing, what they want to share in a different way and reaching different demographics. I think just building that relationship might be part of the solution too.
And we know our US listeners, it's completely different out there. CEOs are wearing bulletproof vests. That's a whole other conversation that we can't touch with the 10-foot pole, because I think we have a little bit of a different understanding of what's happening in terms of that climate. But again, I think, and maybe even there, maybe that's our part of the problem too, that just they feel unreachable, untouchable, and they can't have those conversations. And that's where some of the tension comes from, like you mentioned, Sarah.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to switch gears a little bit. I know that as women all in this podcast right now, but also nursing as a female dominated profession, I know, Laura, that you have a nonprofit called Women Who Lead. Can you tell us a little bit more about this? Because we need more women leaders out there.
Couldn't agree more. The sort of short story of Women Who Lead, which people can definitely read more on the website if they're interested, is I have two very high energy young boys at home. When I was pregnant with the first, I had a very great mentor and close friend of mine say, okay, great. This is so exciting. I'm so happy for you. And the two things he said that stood out to me are, he was like, what are your plans for each trimester? And I went through them, and when I got to the third trimester, he was like, okay, that's great, but maybe cut that in half. And he's like, if you can do more, that's awesome. But he was like, from what I have seen, he's a physician. He's like, you might just, give yourself some grace as you go through this for the first time. But the second thing he said is, you should probably find a female mentor who's actually been pregnant and can speak to a little bit more what that experience is like. And so when I came back after having my son, I was just looking for other women in healthcare who cared about making things better, who also wanted to raise a family, but wanted to lead and learn and get the skills needed for things to be different. So fast forward, I couldn't, I'm not a nurse, I'm not a doctor. I couldn't find anything that was targeting me as a woman in healthcare. So I actually went to a program in the States, loved it. It was for women in healthcare, interested in leadership specifically. And so I came back, and so there's sort of three things. There's creating networking opportunities, and that's both for life and circumstances about how we navigate being women in healthcare and all the different identities we have, caring for elderly parents, being mothers, sisters, whatever it may be. But also we know that from science that the biggest way that men advance is through their social networks. Right. They share opportunities. They share experiences of, you might not want to work at that organization, like heads up, this is what's happening there. Or wow, great things are happening here. That's how good people end up in great places. Right. And that's how you end up with strong teams of people that are moving towards a shared goal. In addition to networks, it's just the professional development opportunities. And in healthcare, we don't work in banks. We don't work in private corporations that can throw all this money at our development. So what Women Who Lead does is just tries to create free opportunities for women at any career stage, any profession, like any role in healthcare to come together and talk about media skills, talk about how to ask for a raise or how to negotiate things, how to get a job, whatever it is that the community says that they need to develop across stages. And then the last one is mentorship, which we actually haven't done a ton of formal programming around yet. But women find other women who can help them out and guide them and offer insights on how to get where they want to go. And it's just magical to watch it happen. And such a great example, although I'm very biased, of building something and have it being purpose built. That like, if this isn't working, that's fine. We'll offer different content, because the whole objective is that women are able to build community and connections that help them get wherever they want to go in their careers.
Yeah, no, I love it.
That's amazing. You do so much, Laura. I don't know how you have enough hours in the day, but I'm so impressed by everything you do. It's been an amazing conversation, and I think we've learned so much. I just love the way you think and explain things. Is there anything that you want to share before we wrap this episode up?
I don't think there's anything else I want to share, because I know I could have conversations with you guys repeatedly. But I will ask a question, if I may, and I'm happy to answer it as well. If we come back a year from now and the three of us are reflecting on 2025 and celebrating what's different, because humans will overestimate what they can get done in a day, but it's January 14th. There's a full year ahead. What is it that you hope we're celebrating a year from now? What are you seeing, hearing, or feeling that's different than today?
Wow, that's a really big question. What am I hoping that would be different? I mean, I think for me, it's always some form of like, how have I as a person evolved or learned or changed? What situations or interactions have I had that I've learned or grown from? So I hope for a year from now, there's a good life lesson that I've had and that I've learned and I've grown from it. I don't know what that might be. We're, like you said, we're at the start of the year. I'm always about, learning and seeing where there might be an opportunity to improve. I don't know what will happen. But I do hope that a year from now, maybe I'll be in a different place in terms of my advocacy goals for healthcare, or maybe maybe I'll be in a different role. I have no idea. I just always hope to move forward and try something new and be accountable to myself and others when it comes to healthcare.
Yeah, and I think it's similar for me. I just love the aspect of storytelling. So I want to continue sharing stories of what I'm going through and other people as well. Having different types of guests on the podcast, people that we haven't had before, or even having people back, but in a different capacity and discussing different things. And, hearing from our listeners about what resonates with them and what's inspired them to do something different. And like just hearing from our listeners, I think is something that we always want to hear. I actually heard from a nurse recently that said our podcast actually, it made her want to be a nurse again. She was ready to quit and she decided to keep going, and she found a new role that worked better for her. So it's just these types of stories and the feedback that I love hearing.
What about you?
I love those answers. I'm going to answer it not in terms of my own goals, although it's sort of a hope I have for health leaders or anyone in healthcare that's listening broadly. That definitely applies to myself. I hope that we let someone change our minds. And I like that. It picks up on what both of you are saying, but when we can widen our aperture, like I often describe it as like, great, I'm growing, I'm learning. But if we don't do that, we're never going to move beyond where we are now and figure out how to be different. And there's so much that can look so many different ways. It means you have a different partner or a different perspective or a different identity as part of the conversation or at the table. Or it could just be like the one piece of feedback you get or the one conversation you have where you sit with it and you're like, like what can be different because of that? And I'm drawn back to Sarah, the comment you made earlier about like, I wish we would just stop blaming. So I'm going to add that in there too, because I think that it's when we can stop blaming and feel a little bit safer that better is possible, that we can be open to those things. So hopefully we can all create that space for each other.
Yeah, let's see. I mean, this is documented, like you said, January 14th.
Set it here.
Let's see where we are a year from now. So definitely would love to touch base. And thank you so much, Laura, for coming onto the Green Nurse podcast. I think we've been trying to do this for some time, but I'm glad that we've finally been able to make it happen. Where can people find you, Laura?
I mean, I was going to say on the organizational website, but now I need to go check that out. But they can reach me on X. They can reach me on LinkedIn. I
Drop
have a
the handles,
website where you're on X. It's at Laura Desveaux. You can search me on LinkedIn and reach out. My email is just my first name dot my last name at thp.ca, which is the organization I work for. Honestly, if you can find me anywhere, I will check all the things and we will connect. But happy to hear what resonated, happy to hear what didn't, because both of those things make me better. So,
and for all those listeners that are just listening to the audio, it's Desveaux. Lots of silent letters.
We'll drop it.
Put in the show notes. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm sure we could do this again. We really, really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you for listening to the Gritty Nurse podcast. If you have any suggestions or want to hear a specific topic, email us at grittynurses@gmail.com. That's grittynurses@gmail.com.
We are also speakers and authors available for engagements related to advocacy, nursing, mental health, and health policy. Please connect with us.
We want to take a moment to express our deepest gratitude to our incredible sponsors. Their generous support has been instrumental in making our podcast a reality.
Thanks to their belief in our mission, we're able to bring you engaging content and connect with our amazing community. We're truly grateful for your partnership. Thank you.